Hi everyone, I hope that you are all doing well. I'm going to be talking about the novel Ravensong and one of my favorite Native American authors, Lee Maracle. She dedicates her novel to all those women who fought the epidemic when this country, Canada, was not concerned with our health. I insert the word Canada into this quote to emphasize the fact that this narrative is not taking place in the United States. Often when people think of the term Native American or American in general, they think of the United States. But the term Native American is actually much broader than that. If you think about it, we have two continents that are known as the Americas. We have North America, which includes Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And then you have South America. People who are native to these regions actually do not like the fact that the United States view themselves as the only Americans, because in their opinion, they are Americans too. Lee Maracle identifies herself as a Native American and a Canadian woman. Native Americans have dual citizenship within their tribe as well as within the country in which they reside. Another word I would like to draw your attention to is this word right here, epidemic. I have taught this novel in past semesters and students really seem to enjoy it, and I hope that you will as well. But I do recognize the fact that it may become a little bit more personal due to the fact that we're currently going through a pandemic and the characters within the novel are experiencing an epidemic that occurred during the 1950s in Canada. I'm going to start by giving you some basic information about Lee Maracle. She was born in British Columbia in 1950. She was the granddaughter of Chief Dan George. She was raised in Vancouver. She was one of the first students to integrate into the Canadian public school system. Now, I do want to highlight this fact for a moment because the novel Ravensong is actually about a young girl named Stacy who travels from her village into the white community to attend public school in Canada. So in a way, this novel is also connected to the author. Lee Maracle is a Canadian scholar, poet, and author. She was one of the first Aboriginal people to be published in Canada. Her research focuses on sociology. She is a Native American activist. She founded the International School of Writing and served as a member of the First Nations self-government. What I find very fascinating myself is the fact that Lee Maracle wrote this novel in 3 days. She actually wrote it for a novel writing contest. At the time, she did not have a whole lot of money, so she didn't own a computer, and she actually wrote the novel using a typewriter. But during the process, her typewriter broke, and she had to ask a friend to bring one to her house so that she can finish her novel within the time frame and submit it to the contest. Unfortunately, her novel did not win the contest, but the publishing company was interested in publishing it. She actually chose not to publish the novel with them, and I'm going to read these two quotes that explain why. The winner wrote a novel about Genghis Khan. I called the publishing company asking how it was possible to write a novel about a historical figure that had been dead for so long. That's a rewrite, I said. And if you think about what she's saying within these two quotes, her argument actually makes sense. She wrote a historical nonfiction novel about a Native American community, whereas the person who won the writing contest wrote a historical novel about a historical figure, Genghis Khan. And the way that she sees it, Genghis Khan has been written about in history books. So it did not make sense to her that someone would be able to write a novel about him because that's just rewriting history. And it's because the publishing company chose the writer who wrote about Genghis Khan as the winner that she did not publish Ravensong with the publishing company that held the contest. She instead published Ravensong with Press Gang in 1993. Press Gang was bought out by Polestar, who was later bought out by Raincoast, and unfortunately, the book had to try to compete with popular books such as Harry Potter, and it did not sell well, so the book went out of print for many years. Fortunately, Canadian scholars refused to let the novel die, and the book was republished in 2012 by Canadian Scholar Press. So Ravensong began a new life as a school text. The novel itself is this tale of the last epidemic in which natives were not permitted to go to the hospitals of our choice. If you remember from the very first slide, I talked about the dedication of this novel to the women who fought the epidemics when the country of Canada did not care about Native American health. And this quote right here from the preface lets you know exactly how much they didn't care. They did not permit Native Americans to go to hospitals. Now, here she uses the word of our choice, but later on in the novel, you're actually going to see Native Americans who try to go to the hospital, and they are turned away by the Canadian doctors and nurses during the time of the epidemic. This is something that we would be very shocked or astounded to see occurring within modern day society. But during the 1950s, prior to the civil rights movement, people of color, which included Asians, Native Americans, African Americans, they were not allowed to use the same facilities as white people. You can even see this in US history. And this is something that didn't just occur within America, it also occurred with countries like Canada. The way this particular quote reads, you might think it doesn't have to do with race, but you're actually going to learn as you're reading the novel that the Canadian doctors are turning them away in favor of serving the white community. So during the epidemic, when there are a lot of people sick, they're accepting the Canadian patients who are ill, but they are turning away the Native Americans, and they also refuse to come onto the reservation to treat them as well. So the Native Americans are having to fight the epidemic on their own. Prior to this, they had to fight other epidemics on their own. And so Lee Maracle dedicates her book to all the Native American women who fought the epidemics. Now, something that might be a little confusing at first that I'm going to try and help you understand is that according to Lee Maracle, the setting of the novel is within a fictitious reserve. So the reserve where Stacy lives is not a real reservation. However, the community in which she is brought up did exist at one point. And she actually describes the community as one of the many West Coast communities. Now, the reason she uses one of the many is because there were many Native American communities that lived within the Americas. In the preface, Lee Maracle writes, "The Canadian government was continuously amalgamating reserves or villages from early settlement until around 1916. Our shrinking population led to many rounds of such amalgamations. All of our consolidations were due to epidemic loss." Amalgamating is defined as unifying or bringing together, and consolidation has a very similar definition as well. As the population of a tribe began to decrease, that tribe would no longer be recognized by the Canadian government. Instead, they would consolidate and amalgamate the various tribes into smaller groups. So say that prior to the epidemic you had maybe 100 different tribes, but if enough people died from those tribes, those could be cut in half. So instead of 100 tribes, you now have 50. I'm going to end by focusing on this last quote from Lee Maracle's preface, and you'll recognize some of the terminology that I've actually put in bold and underlined for you. The first term is that of the noble savage, and the second is that of the brutes. We talked about these in reference to Black Panther, particularly when we were talking about the culture of Wakanda. The term noble savage was actually often used to try and get people not to be afraid of the Native Americans so that they would be more willing to move to the colonies in the United States. Brute was a term that was used more often when the colonists decided to expand west. They were trying to justify the eradication of the Native American communities that already lived there. Lee Maracle writes, "Although we are not the noble savages of romantic writers, we are also not the brutes of some of the more racist writers either. What is still an aspect of our lives is our speaking to trees, plants, fish, and animals, in particular our speaking to cedar and raven." Something that you need to know about Native American culture in reference to this text is that characters such as cedar and raven are meant to be read as real rather than as a metaphor. These spirits are constantly interacting, adapting, and impacting Native American culture. If you have any questions regarding the preface of the novel, please let me know and I will try to elaborate a bit more. And my next video will be on the first chapter of Ravensong because I want to help ease you into the novel. Bye guys.